Ashford Basin, Northern Territory, September 1882. While every settler on the frozen plains was building their fireplaces the conventional way with chimneys rising straight from hearthstones set against cabin walls, Vera Hollister was doing something that made her neighbors ride past just to shake their heads in disbelief. The 31-year-old widow was raising her cabin floor a full 4 feet above the ground on a foundation of stacked stone, building what looked like a crawl space beneath the living quarters and running a network of stone channels under the floorboards like the roots of some impossible tree. Her daughter, 8-year-old Beatrice, worked beside her every day, hauling stones and mixing clay with the same grim determination that marked her mother's face. Nobody understood what Vera knew about heat that rises in floors that must stay warm when winter comes howling down from the Canadian wastes. The townspeople called it Hollister's folly, said the woman had lost her mind along with her husband, predicted the whole structure would collapse or fill with smoke, or somehow manage both disasters at once. But Vera had learned something in the years before she came west. Something about the way Romans heated their bathhouses 2,000 years ago. Something about capturing heat beneath floors and letting it rise slowly through stone and wood into the spaces where people actually lived and breathed and tried to survive winters that could kill a family in a single night. Vera Hollister had arrived in the Northern Territory in the spring of 1880 with her husband Daniel and their daughter Beatrice, part of the wave of Eastern families seeking land under the Homestead Act, fleeing crowded cities for the promise of 160 acres and a fresh start. Daniel had been a stonemason in Philadelphia, skilled in his trade, respected by contractors who valued his precision with mortar and his understanding of how weight distributed through properly laid stone. Before Philadelphia, he had worked for 3 years in New York on the restoration of a wealthy merchant's townhouse, a building that had once housed a Turkish bath in its basement, heated by an ancient system of brick channels that carried hot air beneath tiled floors. Daniel had spent weeks studying that system, sketching it, measuring it, understanding how the Romans and later the Ottomans had heated entire buildings from below, using nothing but fire and stone and the simple physics of rising air. He had explained it to Vera one evening over dinner, describing how hot air traveled through the channels, how the floor itself became a radiating surface, how the warmth distributed evenly rather than concentrating near a single hearth. She had listened carefully, storing the knowledge away without knowing she would someday need it to survive. The Northern Territory delivered land as promised, but it also delivered winters that Daniel's Philadelphia experience had not prepared him for. Their first winter in a hastily built cabin with a conventional stone fireplace nearly broke them. The fire roared constantly, consuming wood faster than Daniel could split it, yet the floor remained frozen. The walls leaked cold through every gap in the chinking, and Beatrice slept in 3 layers of wool, while frost formed on the inside walls. Daniel burned his hands feeding the flames every 2 hours through the night, fighting to keep temperatures survivable while the fireplace sent most of its heat straight up through the chimney into the prairie sky. By February, he was exhausted, sick with fever from the constant exposure, weakened by months of inadequate sleep and the relentless labor of fire feeding. In March, a late blizzard caught him returning from the woodlot. They found him 50 yards from the cabin door, frozen solid, the axe still in his hands. Vera buried him in April when the ground thawed enough to dig, and spent that spring and summer in a fog of grief and terror, uncertain how she and Beatrice would survive another winter, in a cabin that had nearly killed them all, even with Daniel's constant labor. The idea came to her in August, while she was repairing the stone foundation where frost heave had shifted several rocks out of alignment. She knelt in the dirt beside the cabin, looking at the shallow crawl space beneath the floorboards, remembering Daniel's descriptions of the Turkish bath heating system, the brick channels, the rising hot air, the floors that stayed warm for hours after the fire died. The conventional fireplace had failed them. It would fail them again come winter. But what if she could adapt what Daniel had described, build those channels beneath the cabin floor, raise the structure high enough to create real space for air to move and heat to distribute, transform the floor itself into a heating surface instead of the coldest part of the room? The physics made sense even to her untrained mind. Heat rose, everyone knew that. But in a conventional fireplace, the heat rose from beside you, straight up the chimney, wasting most of its energy heating the outside air. If the heat rose from below, from channels built into the foundation, it would have to pass through the floor, warming it, before entering the room. The floor would become warm. The room would heat from the bottom up, instead of trying to force warmth down from a ceiling that leaked heat through every shake and board. She spent 2 weeks studying the existing foundation, sketching plans in the margins of Daniel's old notebooks, calculating how many stones she would need, how much clay for mortar, how to build channels that would draw air properly without filling with smoke. Beatrice watched her mother work through the planning with quiet intensity, asking occasional questions that showed she understood more than most 8-year-olds would. When Vera finally explained what they were going to build, Beatrice simply nodded and asked what she could do to help. They began in early September, racing against the calendar, knowing that first snow could come as early as October, and they needed the system functional before then. Vera decided against tearing down the existing cabin. Instead, she would raise it, jack up the entire structure foot by foot, build a proper stone foundation underneath with enough height to create real crawl space for the heating channels, then lower the cabin onto its new elevated base. It was ambitious work for a widow and a child, but Vera had her husband's tools, his knowledge of stone and mortar, and a desperation that made impossible labor seem merely difficult. The foundation work began with excavation, digging out the shallow crawl space to a full 4 feet of depth, creating room for the channel network that would snake beneath the entire floor area. The soil came away in hard chunks, resistant after a summer of baking sun, requiring the full weight of Vera's body behind the shovel to break through. Beatrice hauled dirt in wooden buckets, dumping it in growing piles around the cabin perimeter, her small hands blistered but steady, her face set in concentration that mirrored her mother's own expression. They worked from first light until darkness made further progress impossible, then rose the next morning and continued, day after day, measuring their advancement in inches rather than feet. Vera dug the main channel first, a trench running from what would be the firebox location on the exterior wall, branching into multiple pathways that covered the foundation footprint in a pattern like tree roots spreading through soil. Each channel measured 8 inches wide and 8 inches deep, sized to allow good airflow while maintaining structural integrity in the foundation above. She used string lines and wooden stakes to ensure the channels remained level and straight, knowing that any significant deviation from horizontal would create low spots where ash could accumulate and obstruct the draw. The precision mattered. A channel that rose even an inch in the wrong direction could trap smoke or create back pressure that would weaken the entire system's efficiency. The stone laying required the most precision. Vera selected flat rocks from a creek bed 2 miles distant, hauling them in a small wagon that Beatrice helped pull when the load was light enough. Each stone was fitted carefully to create smooth channel walls that would not obstruct air movement or create turbulence that might weaken the draft. The work demanded patience that tested Vera's resolve on difficult days. She would set a stone, check its fit against neighboring pieces, remove it, chip away a protruding edge with a hand chisel, test the fit again, repeating the process until the stone seated properly with minimal gaps. The channels ran in several parallel paths from the firebox, spreading heat distribution across the entire floor rather than concentrating it in one area. Vera had calculated the pattern carefully, ensuring that no part of the cabin floor sat more than 3 feet from an active channel, guaranteeing even heat distribution across the entire living space. Where channels branched or turned, she built the junctions wider to prevent air from backing up or creating smoke pockets that could reduce system efficiency. The clay mortar required its own preparation ritual. Vera mixed it in batches using soil from a particular section of the creek bank, soil that contained the right proportion of clay to sand for workable consistency without excessive shrinkage during curing. She added water slowly, working the mixture with her hands until it achieved a texture that would spread smoothly into joints without being so wet it would slump and lose its seal. Beatrice learned to recognize proper consistency by feel, kneading small batches while her mother worked the larger quantities, both of them developing calluses that hardened over weeks of constant contact with abrasive clay. The floor vents required special attention. Vera installed them at strategic points across the floor area. Small iron grates set into the planking directly above the channel network, allowing heated air to rise from the crawl space into the living quarters. She placed vents near where the table would stand, near the sleeping corner, near the cooking area, ensuring every part of the cabin would receive warmth. Additionally, she built several small vertical flue stacks inside the cabin itself, brick columns rising from the crawl space through the floor at different locations, each topped with a small vent that would release warm air at various heights. These interior flues would create multiple heat sources distributed throughout the room, rather than a single chimney drawing everything to one point. The firebox construction took place on the exterior wall, built into the stone foundation itself, so the fire could be stoked from outside without bringing wood or smoke into the living space. Vera designed it with a heavy iron door that could seal tight, maintaining draft control while allowing her to feed fuel without opening the cabin door in winter. The firebox sat at the lowest point of the system, ensuring hot air would rise naturally through all the channels before escaping through the distributed flue network. The townspeople of Ashford Basin had watched Vera's construction project with a mixture of amusement and concern that shifted toward alarm as winter approached. What had started as skeptical commentary at the general store evolved into active attempts at intervention as neighbors worried that the widow and her child would freeze or suffocate in their experimental structure. The first confrontation came from a farmer named Robert Grimshaw, who rode out to the Hollister claim in mid-October with several other men to inspect the work. They found Vera mortaring the final stones around one of the interior flue stacks, while Beatrice cleaned excess clay from the floor vents with a brush and bucket of water. Grimshaw dismounted and walked slowly around the cabin, examining the elevated foundation, the exterior firebox, the multiple small chimneys rising at odd angles from different points in the roof. He shook his head repeatedly, his expression growing darker with each circuit of the structure. "You have built something dangerous here," Grimshaw said finally, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. "A cabin needs a proper fireplace, a proper chimney, proper draft. This is a maze of stone and holes. The smoke will back up. It will fill your living space. It will kill you both in your sleep." "The smoke vents through multiple flues," Vera replied without looking up from her work. "The draw is distributed, not concentrated. Hot air rises through the channels beneath the floor and exits through the flue network. The floor stays warm, the room heats evenly, and we burn less wood for better results. Grimshaw pointed at the exterior firebox. You cannot even tend your fire from inside. You will freeze going in and out to feed it. The firebox is insulated and designed for long burns, Vera said. I feed it morning and evening, not every hour like a conventional hearth. The stone channels hold heat between firings. Another farmer crouched to peer into the crawlspace through one of the access hatches Vera had built for channel maintenance. He saw the network of stone passages disappearing into darkness, the complex branching pattern, the sealed joints where Vera had applied clay mortar. This is too complicated, the man said. Too many places for failure. One crack, one leak, and carbon monoxide seeps into your home. I have built inspection access at every junction, Vera replied. The system is designed for maintenance and monitoring. The channels are sealed with clay and sand mixture that flexes with temperature changes rather than cracking. The men exchanged glances, clearly unconvinced. Grimshaw removed his hat and addressed Vera directly, his tone softening from judgment to genuine concern. Mrs. Hollister, we all respected your husband. Daniel was a fine stonemason, skilled in his craft. But this design, it is not proven, not tested in our climate. A conventional fireplace may not be perfect, but it is reliable. We know it works. We know families survive winters with it. Your system is unknown. You are risking your life and your daughter's life on an experiment. Vera set down her trowel and stood, facing the group of men with clay-stained hands and steady eyes. She gestured at the cabin around them, at Beatrice working quietly at the floor vents, at the stone foundation that represented months of brutal labor. My husband died because a conventional fireplace could not keep our cabin warm enough to prevent him from constantly going outside for more wood, she said quietly. He froze 50 yards from our door because he was exhausted from feeding flames that heated our ceiling while our floor stayed frozen. I will not let that happen again. I will not spend another winter burning wood constantly while my daughter sleeps in wool coats. This system will work because the physics demand that it work. Heat rises. I am simply giving it a path that benefits us rather than the sky. By late October, the foundation was complete. The cabin successfully raised and repositioned on its new elevated base. The channel network sealed and tested with small fires that confirmed proper draw and heat distribution. Vera lit the first real fire on October 28th, feeding it steadily through the exterior firebox, while she and Beatrice waited inside to feel the results. The flames crackled in the firebox chamber, sending heated air coursing through the stone passages that ran beneath their feet like underground rivers of warmth. Within 2 hours, the floor planks were noticeably warm to the touch, radiating gentle heat that rose into the cabin air. The iron vents released steady streams of heated air, shimmering and invisible, but undeniable when Vera held her hand above them. The small interior flue stacks radiated gentle warmth from multiple points around the room, each one glowing faintly with conducted heat from the channels below. The temperature distribution was remarkably even. No cold corners, no frozen spots near the walls, just consistent warmth rising from below and filling the space uniformly. Beatrice removed her shoes and stood on the warm floor in her stockings, her eyes wide with wonder at the sensation of heat beneath her feet, instead of cold planks that stung through wool. The response from the wider community was swift. By early November, Vera Hollister's heating system had become the primary topic of conversation at every gathering in Ashford Basin. The general store buzzed with debate whenever settlers gathered to purchase supplies or exchange news. The church social included prayers for the Hollister family's safety. spoken by the minister with solemn concern that reflected the congregation's genuine worry about the experimental structure and the souls who lived within it. Several women approached Beatrice after school to ask with careful concern whether her mother was feeling well, whether perhaps the grief of widowhood had affected her judgment, whether the child felt safe sleeping above fire channels that ran beneath her bed. The child responded to each inquiry with the same calm statement her mother had taught her. "Our floor is warm and our home is safe. You are welcome to visit and feel it for yourself." Few accepted the invitation initially, preferring to maintain their skepticism from a safe distance rather than confront evidence that might challenge their assumptions. A newspaper correspondent passing through town interviewed several residents about the unusual construction project and published a brief article in the territorial paper under the headline, "Widows Gamble Against Winter." December arrived with cold that tested every structure in Ashford Basin. Temperatures dropped steadily through the first week, settling into a pattern of nights below zero and days that barely climbed above 10 degrees. Conventional cabins showed their limitations immediately. Fireplaces roared through the daylight hours and into the nights, consuming wood at rates that alarmed families who had carefully calculated their winter fuel supplies. Floors froze despite the flames. Children wore boots indoors. Frost formed on interior walls where cold air found gaps in the chinking. At the Hollister cabin, Vera maintained her twice-daily firing schedule, feeding the exterior firebox each morning and evening with carefully split wood that burned hot and clean in the insulated chamber. The heated air rose through the channel network, warming the stone passages, transferring heat to the floor planks above, rising through the distributed vents into the living space. The interior temperature held steady between 52 and 58 degrees, even on the coldest nights, while the floor surface measured a consistent 68 to 70 degrees across its entire area. Beatrice walked barefoot on the warm planks, studying her lessons at the table without needing to huddle near a fire, sleeping under 2 blankets instead of the 4 layers required in their old cabin. The distributed heat sources meant no cold corners, no frozen edges where the warmth could not reach. Vera's wood consumption ran approximately 1/5 of what their conventional fireplace had required the previous winter. The thermal mass of the stone channel network absorbed heat during firing periods and released it slowly over the 12 hours between burns, maintaining temperature stability that eliminated the constant cycle of overheating and cooling that plagued conventional systems. On December 18th, a particularly cold morning when the outdoor temperature reached -15, Robert Grimshaw sent his eldest son to check on the Hollister family. The boy returned with a report that his father initially dismissed as exaggeration. The woman and child were comfortable, the cabin was warm, they were burning far less wood than any other household. Grimshaw rode out that afternoon to investigate personally. Vera welcomed him without hesitation, invited him to remove his boots and feel the floor, to hold his hands over the various vents, to examine the firebox and see how little fuel she had consumed since morning. Grimshaw spent an hour in stunned silence, walking the cabin floor in his stocking feet, crouching beside the vents to feel the rising warm air, checking the exterior firebox to confirm it was not some trick. Finally, he stood near the center of the room and spoke words that would change everything. "I was wrong about your system," he said quietly. "Completely wrong. This is the warmest cabin in Ashford Basin, and you are burning less wood than anyone. I do not understand how it works, but I cannot deny that it does work." January 1883 brought cold that veterans of 10 Dakota winters described as unprecedented. An Arctic air mass settled over the territory and refused to move. driving temperatures into a realm where metal became brittle, where breath froze before it could fully leave the lungs, where any unprotected skin developed frostbite in under 2 minutes. On January 9th, the thermometer outside Robert Grimshaw's home registered -41 degrees at dawn, the coldest temperature ever recorded in Ashford Basin's brief history. The wind made survival even more precarious, howling across the open plains at sustained speeds of 25 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding 40, driving the effective temperature into a zone where exposure meant rapid death. Livestock died in their pens despite shelters. Wells froze solid. Cabin doors sealed themselves shut with ice, and in conventional cabins across the territory, families faced impossible choices about wood consumption. Knowing their supplies could not last at current burn rates, but unable to reduce fires without risking frozen pipes and their own survival. The Grimshaw family burned 400 pounds of wood on January 9th alone, maintaining a fire so large that the chimney stones cracked from thermal stress. Yet the floor remained frozen, the walls accumulated frost on their interior surfaces, and the children slept in a pile of blankets on a raised platform, their breath visible despite flames that roared 6 feet away. Robert Grimshaw made his decision on January 10th. He arrived at the Hollister cabin before dawn, his face raw from wind exposure, his eyes hollow with exhaustion and fear. His youngest daughter had developed frostbite on her toes, despite sleeping indoors in wool socks and 3 blankets. His wood supply was half gone with 2 months of winter remaining. "We are burning everything we have, and we are still freezing," Grimshaw said. "My daughter may lose toes because the floor in her own home is too cold for feet. I need to modify my cabin immediately. Can you teach me how to build what you have built?" Vera invited him inside and spent the next 3 hours going through every detail of the Hippocos system. She explained that full implementation would require raising his cabin and excavating beneath it, work that could not be done while his family was living there in winter. But she could design a partial system, a modified approach that used his existing crawl space to run limited channels beneath the main living area, venting through new floor grates. It would not be as efficient as a complete Hippocos installation, but it would dramatically improve heat distribution and reduce wood consumption. Grimshaw left with detailed drawings and a commitment to begin work immediately. Vera and Beatrice agreed to assist with the technical aspects of the construction. The modified Grimshaw system became operational on January 18th after 8 days of intensive labor in conditions that made every task exponentially harder. The results were immediate and dramatic. The family's wood consumption dropped by 60% within the first day. The floor temperature rose from near freezing to a comfortable 55 degrees. The children removed their boots indoors for the first time in weeks, and Robert Grimshaw stood in his own cabin with tears running down his weathered face, feeling warmth rise from below through floor vents he had helped install, understanding finally what Vera had tried to explain months earlier about heat that rises from where it serves rather than where it wastes. Word of the Grimshaw conversion spread through Ashford Basin within hours. By January 20th, Vera had been approached by 14 families requesting similar modifications to their existing structures. She explained patiently that she could not perform the labor herself, that each family would need to do their own excavation and construction, but that she would freely provide designs, supervision, and technical guidance to anyone who asked. She drew standardized plans for 3 different cabin sizes, calculating channel layouts and vent positions for structures ranging from small bachelor claims to large family homesteads. She wrote detailed instructions for clay mortar mixing, stone selection, and firebox construction. She made herself available for consultation at any hour, riding through brutal cold to inspect channel work or troubleshoot draft problems. Beatrice became her assistant engineer, helping measure crawlspace dimensions, sketching channel layouts, explaining the basic physics to children whose parents were modifying their homes. By February, 19 families in Ashford Basin had implemented some version of Vera's Hippocaust heating system. The modifications ranged from simple channel additions beneath existing crawl spaces to complete cabin elevations with full distributed flue networks matching Vera's original design. Every implementation showed immediate improvements in comfort and fuel efficiency. Families who had been burning 300 to 400 pounds of wood daily reduced consumption to 100 pounds or less. Children who had not removed their coats indoors since November walked barefoot on warm floors. Spring arrived late in the Northern Territory, with snow remaining on the ground through most of April and temperatures not reliably staying above freezing until early May. But when the thaw finally came, and families could assess what the winter had taken and what it had left behind, the contrast between households with modified heating and those still using conventional fireplaces was stark and undeniable. Families who had implemented Hippocaust systems had preserved 90% of their winter wood supplies, maintained comfortable living conditions throughout the coldest months, and suffered no cold-related injuries. Families who had relied on conventional fireplaces had exhausted their fuel stocks, endured constant discomfort, and in several cases had suffered frostbite or illness. The economic implications became clear as spring planting season began. Families who had burned through all their winter wood now faced the choice between purchasing expensive replacement fuel or spending time cutting wood when they should have been planting crops. Families with intact wood supplies could focus entirely on agriculture, gaining weeks of additional productive time. By August 1883, Hippocaust heating systems had spread beyond Ashford Basin into neighboring settlements. Vera received letters from as far as 200 miles away, requests for plans, technical questions, reports of successful implementations. She answered every letter personally, refined her standardized designs based on feedback from other builders, developed troubleshooting guides for common problems. The knowledge she had inherited from her husband's work in Philadelphia, adapted through desperate innovation and proven through brutal testing in the Dakota winter, was becoming public domain, spreading through settler communities wherever cold threatened survival. The territorial government took notice. The Department of Agriculture sent an inspector to examine Vera's system and interview families who had implemented it. His report recommended that Hippocaust heating technology be included in agricultural extension guidance for new homesteaders, noting that improved heating efficiency could significantly increase settlement survival rates. Vera was invited to speak at the Territorial Fair in September, addressing an audience of over 200 farmers and homesteaders about the physics of heat distribution and the practical implementation of underfloor heating channels. She brought Beatrice with her, and the girl demonstrated channel construction techniques using stone and clay, explaining the principles with confidence born from solving a life-or-death problem. Vera Hollister lived in that elevated cabin with the distributed heating system for another 38 years. She never remarried, devoted herself to raising Beatrice and to serving as an informal engineering consultant to families across the territory who sought her guidance on heating modifications. Beatrice attended normal school as planned, became a teacher, married a farmer who built their home with a Hippocaust system from the foundation up, and raised 4 children who grew up playing barefoot on warm floors while blizzards raged outside. The original Hollister cabin stood until 1931, when age and weather finally undermined its structural integrity beyond repair. When Beatrice's grandson dismantled it to salvage usable timber, He found the stone channel network still intact, the clay seals still holding after nearly 5 decades of continuous use. The system that had saved 2 lives in the winter of 1882 to 1883 had continued functioning perfectly for half a century. By 1890, Hypocaust heating systems had been installed in over 300 structures across the Dakota Territories and into Montana, Minnesota, and the Canadian Prairie provinces. Agricultural colleges taught the principles as standard content in homesteading preparation courses. Territorial building codes were modified to explicitly permit and encourage underfloor heating installations. The technology that had seemed so radical when Vera first proposed it had become conventional wisdom, accepted practice for anyone building in regions where winter cold could kill. What Vera understood, what she learned from her husband's knowledge of ancient Roman engineering and proved through desperate innovation, was that fighting physics wastes energy, while cooperating with physics multiplies it. Her neighbors had tried to force heat downward from ceiling-level fires, burning enormous amounts of wood to combat a losing battle against natural convection. Vera had worked with convection, placing heat sources below the living space and letting warm air rise naturally through floors and into rooms. The principle applied to more than heating. Every technical challenge has brute force solutions that exhaust those who attempt them, and elegant solutions that work with natural forces. Conventional fireplaces treated rising heat as a problem to overcome. Vera treated it as a delivery system to harness. The difference was measured in survival, in comfort, in fuel efficiency, and in knowledge that helped hundreds of families endure winters that would otherwise have broken them.